What is up, everybody? This is the Wild Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Heskett, and this is episode 53. 53 today. So, recording this right before Memorial Day. So, this is coming out on Memorial Day. Happy Memorial Day. Hopefully, everyone has a great holiday weekend here. If you're in the United States listening, I know we do have some international listeners. But, that being said, we're getting into it, and today's topic is different. Obviously, this is Wild Nutrition, and Memorial Day kicks off summer, and for me, this is prime time we're into gardening, we're into prepping for hunting season with food plotting and training as much as I can for archery. So, today's topic is going to be about planting plants, planting food. So, I get lots of questions about starting your own garden, how to get into that. A lot of people think they don't have a green thumb, and just like everything, just like tracking macros, just like learning the different movements in the gym, it's a skill. And when we start something that we haven't done since we were kids, you suck at it. That's just being honest. Like, we suck at anything we start new. The first time you try to type on a keyboard, you sucked at it. Like, it was fucking awful, right? So, same thing here. It seems silly, but it's a skill, and other people make it seem effortless and easy. And so today, I want to go over a lot of the mistakes I've made when trying to get things started, planting, fuck-ups, all that kind of good stuff. So we're just going to go ahead, get into things today. Again, this is going to be about growing your own nutrition. Why? So real quick, why would you want to do this in the first place? Like, you might have the interest. So one, it can be incredibly expensive to start up. Let's be honest. Like, if you're looking to save money, there's ways to make this very affordable. But if you are like I was when I kind of like really got into things back when I was living in an apartment, like, you have to have the containers and you have to buy the soil and all that stuff. And the startup cost can be a lot, but it is very rewarding. And the food is generally more nutritious than what you're going to get at the grocery store, because you can make sure those plants are at peak ripeness. You have fertilized them effectively, giving them all the nutrients you can possibly give them to be healthy, not overdoing it. And that, in turn, gives you better nutrition to fuel your body. So, here's some things. So, let's just look back. I started kind of getting into gardening, I don't know, I'm 33, maybe 25 years ago. What would that be? It's before 20, because that would be 13, right? I'm doing my math right. 10 would be, yeah. So, it's before that. I was... Yeah, in probably, I don't know if it was 8, maybe it's 10, something around there. So, that being said, the reason I bring this up is one of the first plants I've ever planted. So, my mom set aside a small part of her bunny garden for my brother and I. And in the section I had, there's one plant that is still there from when I was like between 8 and 10 that I planted there. It's still there to this day. Just saw it's fucking massive now that my parents have cleaned out that area, made it a little bit more open, and that thing has just taken off. So I've been doing it for a while, but really just to kind of like put shit in ground or put shit in a pot and see if it grows. And that can work, and it can also lead to a ton of frustrations of, why the fuck did this work? Do I just suck as a gardener? Do I not have a green thumb? And that's just usually not the case. It's usually not understanding what's going on. So I want to break that down for you today. So fast forward about it's a little over 8 years ago. I'd say maybe 9 years ago, maybe a little bit further along than that. When I had my apartment, moved back to Pennsylvania, got our apartment, kind of like threw some plants onto the apartment patio, deck, whatever the fuck you want to call it. And we had some stuff there. And then my wife and I, so still to this day, we have a chive plant and a sage plant from when we first started dating. So they are 8 years old, growing in our garden currently, and they are massive in our garden. So if anyone needs sage or chives, just hit me up. I have we have more than we ever need. So that's kind of like where we started, and there's been a lot of fuck ups, a lot of things along the way. So let's get into things now. So if you are a beginner gardener, and this is going to be, I'm thinking of me 8 years ago. Where was I? So if you have been doing things, you might get something out of this. But I'm giving things to someone just starting out. You maybe have some plants in a pot, or maybe you don't have anything at all. This is for you. So, all right. First of all, we want to start. I'm imagining apartment. You're in an apartment, or you're just planting in pots. And if it's in ground, awesome. But for most of this episode, it's going to be like you're planting in pots. So pick easy shit. And what that means is things that are hard to kill, because nothing's worse than like, I thought I was taking so much care of this and it's dead. Like, yeah, it's gonna happen. But let's pick things that are fairly easy to grow, and then maybe go a little bit to the next level. So when we're picking out what you want to grow in terms of food, I'm not talking like pretty flowers and stuff. That's a whole nother topic. I do that, but it's not related to this podcast. That'd be completely off topic. Though it does help with pollinators and indirectly might help you. You can message me if you need more information on that. So pick things like the best example I can give you is leaves or roots. That's where you want to go. So start with the herbs. Those are going to be the easiest things. They're also usually pretty cheap at the store. So you can go to a nursery and get them for like $2, $3. And so if you kill it, it doesn't hurt that bad. So easy ones to start with are like rosemary, basil, mint, chives, thyme, and a couple other ones there where you're going to use them a lot, especially like basil and thyme and rosemary. If you cook Italian, like use that a ton. I love like coating a steak in rosemary too. Mint, it's up to you. It's just super resilient. It's really tough to kill. Our mint plant is a couple years old, and it just lives in a pot, and we kind of abuse it. Chives, again, is one that if you're going to use it, awesome. I use it as a substitute for scallions all the time because it's just like there. And I don't have scallions on hand all the time, but we have this massive chive plant. Is it an exact replacement? No, but it works. So rosemary, basil, thyme, that's going to be a lot of people, at least in the U.S., you're going to use those things a shit ton. You could also throw in cilantro. It's pretty easy to grow. Now, with all of these, they're going to go into what's called bolting. So what that is when it flowers. So if you see that happening, you're like, okay, I got this, and oh, pretty flowers. Don't let that happen. So what happens, for example, with basil is when it goes to flower, the plant is going to send all the energy from the leaves, the tasty part you want to eat, to the flowers, because that's where the seeds are going to be. So you stop getting more growth. So if you make pesto, you're going to realize for the first time ever how much basil is used. And you're like, holy shit, that was like 3/4 of my plant. So yeah, you want to make sure you have as much leafy growth as possible. So as soon as you see flowers develop, you're going to cut that off. It's also going to make the plant not taste as good and become even sometimes slightly bitter. So basil is going to be one that does that. Mint does that. Thyme can do it. Rosemary can do it less often, but you want to avoid that as much as possible. So usually that's going to happen in the heat of the summer. It's going to get super hot. That's when it happens. So if you can have them in an area that is slightly cooler, I cannot. Our deck is already it's still May when I'm recording this, and off our deck it sometimes records 120 degrees at ground temperature. It's fucking hot in our backyard. So sometimes you can't avoid it, and that's where you can get into varieties. That's not today's discussion. Again, if you want information, message me about that. I will help you. Not for the beginner. That's like a level 2 thing. We'll talk a little bit level 2 when we get to our third option. So we just talked about herbs. Let's talk about easy veggies. So if you're like, I want to grow actual food, Chris, I don't want to just grow herbs. Like I want to eat something. Cool. So lettuce is super simple. Spinach, radish, kale, chard, collards, and cabbage. So these are all going to be, other than radish is going to be a root. And the reason it's on there is you can buy varieties that are ready in like 3 weeks. So if you're doing things right, or if you fuck up. Those are going to be from seed, which there's an asterisk there on my notes, which I'll get to later. But lettuce, spinach, chard, collards, cabbage, these are all leafy greens. Basically. So they're very, very easy for you to grow. They do have some pest and issues. If I had to pick the easiest one here that's going to give you food throughout, it's going to be chard. So most of these are going to be cool weather, which means they like the spring, they like the late summer into fall. And right now, Memorial Day, we're going into this like July and August, they absolutely hate. That's time for other ones, which we'll get to in a second. So chard, the reason I like that is you kind of use it like kale, though I don't like it in raw salads, but it just keeps on going. It has the best heat tolerance of them all, and you basically, one plant will last you literally an entire season. You can obviously plant more, but that one is very, very easy to grow, and it gives you a ton. So if you like sauteed greens, try that one out. It's in the beet family. The other thing is when it comes to pest control, at least where I live, brassicas, which is anything in like the broccoli family, your cruciferous vegetables. So kale, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, obviously. All those things are going to be, they're considered brassicas. Tons of pests. Chard being in the beet family, not as many pests. So I grew what was killets or something. It's some sort of like Brussels sprout crossover thing. I was like, and we were eating tons of Brussels at the time, like, oh, we would love to have this. And they were about ready, and we left for like a weekend vacation, came back, and they were just decimated. Like caterpillars got on them and just like completely wiped out. So that happens a lot of times with those veggies. So that's why I would recommend considering that one. Lettuce is also super simple. Radish, spinaches, but for a lot of the country, we are moving away from the cool season. There's some quick growing varieties you might be okay with. And then the next one is going to be a lot of what we consider the standard. They're going to be a little bit harder to grow. So if you're totally a noob and you're like, I don't know, like maybe don't start with this, but we're going to list it out if you're more like me and you're like, no, I know I'm a noob, but I'm going all in. So this one's for you. If you're not sure, don't plant these, plant the other ones I talked about. But if you're totally going all in, try one of these out. So tomatoes, zucchini, cucumber, bush beans, and snacking or small peppers. So let's real quick going over them. So again, imagining like I'm in an apartment, I'm going to try this out for the first time, or maybe I'm like planting the first ever like tomato. So if you're picking a tomato, I would recommend you get what's called a determinate tomato. Look that up. So there's two kinds, indeterminate and determinate. Indeterminate is a vine. They are what you are going to consider most tomatoes. So if you see the reel I did on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, literally all three of those are indeterminates. Most of the ones you think of are indeterminates. That's the vast majority. But if you're growing from a pot, that's the last thing you want. And if you're brand new, it's the last thing you want to deal with. So you want to get what's called determinate. It's more like a bush style. It's only going to get to a certain height, 4 to 5, maybe 6 feet at most, but very easy to manage. It's going to get it to the height, and that's going to be it. So you don't have to worry about that. So we've tried the Tasmanian chocolate variety, but there's a bunch of cherry tomatoes, which is what I would recommend you do with tomatoes if you're trying the first time. Cherry tomatoes, the reason I say that is everyone thinks like the big beefsteak, and the plant's going to produce less and more things can go wrong because it takes longer for those things to actually ripen. So you're going to get less and more things can go wrong. You can get pests, you can get cracking, and then it gets moldy, and there's 1,000 things. Versus a cherry tomato plant, you might get a few hundred cherry tomatoes. So even though a few might go wrong, there's a couple coming along just a day or two later that are going to ripen up, and you had one bad batch, and the next batch is ready to go. So cherry or grape or, the small snacking variety, not the big beefsteak slicing tomato. Next one, zucchini. These are pretty easy to grow. They make some that are container friendly, and they're just super, super easy. Now, if you don't have any pollinators in the area, they do need to be pollinated. So that's why it's not in the first, like the easy stuff, because you might have to take the male flower, cut that off, self-fertilize the female flower. I know it's going to be work. So if you have some flowers that attract pollinators on your deck or patio, that can be really helpful, so you don't have to deal with that shit. Cucumbers, same thing. That being said, with cucumbers, you want to look for one that's not a vine. Cucumbers are a vine, they will take over your entire patio. So look for container friendly and more like a bush style. Generally, they don't taste as good. However, zucchinis and cucumbers, you will get so many you literally don't know what to do with. That's where you see all these different cucumber things. Come summer, like tomatoes, cucumbers, I eat them almost every single meal. Next one's bush beans. Beans come in either a pole variety, which is basically a giant vine, or the bushing variety. Get the bushing variety. You can, obviously, if you have a trellis or anything, do the vine, but again, they can get 10, 15, 20 feet long. So bush beans, you can have it in a pot, and if you like green beans, there you go. There's different varieties. Just get your stand. You can have fun. You can get like purple ones, green ones, yellow ones. There's different kinds. Have fun with it. What I recommend anytime you are buying stuff, get stuff you can't get at the store. So if you're always getting just regular green beans, maybe try a yellow or a purple one that you can't necessarily get at the store. And then the last one is snacking peppers. So don't get bell peppers. So bell peppers are something that I have given up on, and many other actual professional gardeners have as well. So it's a lot of work. And you need a lot of plants to get them out. So last year we planted 6 plants. We got literally one pepper from one plant. So 5 of the plants didn't produce jack shit. We planted a banana pepper. Next to it, it produced a ridiculous amount of peppers. I'm like, oh shit, we've had like 3. I'm like, we should have just planted 1 because we don't use banana peppers that much. So your big pepper varieties, especially like bell pepper, you can try it. However, beginner gardener, it's super frustrating, super difficult, high chance of failure. And then just like I said with the snacking ones, the bigger the fruit, these are fruits, guys, the more things can go wrong. So snacking peppers, the little tiny sweet snacking peppers, you can find them easily online, or shishitos, banana peppers, or some of your hot peppers if you really like that. They're going to be easier for you to grow. So try those instead. Again, this is level 2 stuff. Level 2, these are harder. They take more work. More things can go wrong, generally more pests, or just longer time. So what I mean by that is knowing how many days it takes to maturity or till harvest. So, for example, I gave you the example of the radish. Like some varieties are just 21 days, like 3 weeks, or 25 or 30 days. You can see this on the package when you buy something, like really quick turnaround. So even if you fuck up, you can turn around and get another batch pretty quick. And that's why probably right now at farmers markets, if you're going to, you're like, how are there so many fucking radishes? It's they succession plant. They're like plant a row, then they plant one 2 weeks later and plant another row and plant another row, and they just repeat until it's done. Lettuce grows pretty quick. You can have a bunch of lettuce in 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. Kale, again, about that time. Chard's a little bit longer. It's not going to be fully there. Spinach, again, about 30 to 60 days. Cabbage, Depending on the variety, we planted one. I didn't even look at the mistake I made. We planted a Napa style cabbage. It was 60 days to maturity, so it took 2 months. Planted back in late April, I believe, and just harvested 3 of them today. And then other varieties take up to like 90 days. So just you have to look and see. So that's whereas tomatoes are going to be like 70, 80 days. So they're ones that are shorter, generally cherry tomatoes, but it's going to take, a lot of time before you even get one thing off of it. Zucchini tends to be a little bit shorter, like 45, 50 days, depending on the variety. Cucumbers, again, a little bit shorter. Bush beans, usually in that 40 to 50, maybe 60 days. Snacking peppers, about 60 days. Again, generalization, there's different varieties, but so 2 months. You're looking minimum 2 months. Tomatoes generally slightly longer. So if you plant now, and this is important for you to understand, if you plant now, right now it's about June. That means the earliest you're harvesting is going to be August. So remember that if you're like planting, like I'm going to have fresh like tomatoes all summer long, like if you're not there yet, then no, you're going to have them in August and September. And if you're living in this part of the country that it gets really, really cold pretty early, like when my parents live in Maine, it's pretty cold pretty quick. Tomato season's over basically, versus where I am, we're only half an hour from the Chesapeake, the northern tip of the Chesapeake here. So it's actually pretty warm for a long, long time. Like we'll have tomatoes growing into October. So it's important to know that. Which gets to the next point of like knowing your environment. So knowing where you live and then trying to mimic the environment for the plants that you grow as much as possible. So knowing where you live, when you decide you're going to jump into this, look up like your growing zones. For example, I live in zone 7. If you're a beginner, that might not mean literally anything to you. But there's going to be different zones, and generally the higher the number, the warmer it is. And basically it's telling you, so the smaller the number, the shorter your growing season is, and generally you get colder temperatures. So you have a very short growing season versus someone, say, in like Southern California, which is like zone 10, where they can basically like grow literally year round. So you want to figure that out because it's going to tell you what your average like first and last frost dates are. So this is important for when you're like planting now. If your first average frost is somewhere in September, that's going to be a problem if you're growing a tomato variety that might just start producing and it's like in the peak, and then you get hit with a frost, or it's getting into temperatures that aren't ideal for the plant. For example, the nighttime temperatures dipping down to the 40s for tomato, if they don't like that. So you want to figure out what that is, and that's going to help you plan for things. Also, like where you're planting, what's that environment? For example, while it might not be super hot in the surrounding area, my deck is fucking hot. So we planted, we actually, not vegetable, but we planted dahlias on the deck last year, and they got just roasted right before they were able to bloom. We got hit by a heat wave. It was well over 120 on our deck. I don't even want to think about how hot the deck was. And they just got literally like cooked on the deck, so that we got no blooms. So the same thing applies when you're picking things. So we are now having strawberries on our deck. Also, something easy you can grow is strawberries. But we have strawberries on deck, and I got one specifically designed to handle the southwest of the very, very high temps and still keep producing. So understand, like, kind of, okay, like I'm in zone 5, but I get hit with the sun all day long on my apartment balcony, and it's always super, super hot. Like, I have the air running in October. Like, okay, like, you probably it's probably warmer than the surrounding area, so you might need to make adjustments to your plan. It's a little bit more advanced, but it's important to understand, especially when you get the extreme temperatures. And then again, understanding your first and last frost dates. So first frost date is going to be, the average for the area. It might come earlier, it might come last, but the average. So for my area, that's usually like October 15th. However, every year so far, like I think last year was like literally October 31st or something, or even November for our first frost. So that's going to be what kills off most of your plants, your tomatoes, zucchinis, cucumbers. A lot of your plants are going to die then. So if it's, like I said, in September and you're just starting to get things, that was bad planting. You want to pick different varieties. And some plants do well into that. So it's not all plants. So again, back to the beginning of the episode, I said about cool weather plants. So if you're planting kale, your brassicas, peas, which are fairly easy to grow, even though I've had a lot of challenges growing peas, mostly from not understanding that they like the cool temperatures, aka sub 80 degrees. Lettuce, things like that, spinach especially, growing those during that time, they might not be bad, and in fact frost sometimes makes them sweeter, so it tastes even better. So there's different varieties you can grow at different times of the year. What you don't want to do is, if you're waiting, try to grow pumpkins or butternut squash. If you get first frost in September, you're like too late. Good luck with that. Next thing, less is more. Take on only what you can handle. So again, if you're like me, you're like one it all. Pick a couple things to start out. You can always add more, but just pick a few and make sure you're able to handle that before really, really investing, because it can get out of control, especially if you like to travel during the summer. You don't want to feel like you're stuck taking care of these plants and you're trying different, it can be a little stressful if you really want to get into this. So less is more, and that's why herbs are pretty hard to kill, especially rosemary, basil, thyme. And I said mimic the environment. These are Mediterranean herbs grown in like rocky, sandy, shitty soil. They don't like a ton of water. They don't want to be dried out too long, but you can abuse them. I know our rosemary and our lavender flower/herb, it likes abuse. Like, it likes the heat. It likes to be dry. It doesn't like a ton of water, and it thrives like that. Our chives take a beating. Our mint takes a beating. Thyme takes a beating. Basil likes consistent watering. Cilantro will like consistent watering, but they do pretty good. You do the same thing to lettuce, and it's not great. So they like consistent watering, cool environment. Tomatoes, zucchinis, a lot of these were like tomatoes. Were more like southern United States, so they don't like the cold. They like consistent watering, not like no water and then dump on the water and stuff. Peppers don't like a ton of water. They can like the heat, lots of sun generally. So you want to mimic that environment for them as best you can. And that can help you pick and choose. For example, going back to that deck thing, like my deck gets super, super hot. I can plant cool season vegetables very, very early, like April. But right now in May, we took them all away, basically. We have peas that are just about up, and I have to put the umbrella up every single day, keep them cool in the midday. Going back to take on only how much you can handle, just to make sure that they keep producing and they don't get fried. So understand kind of what you have and do the best you can, which is why I'm helping you out with this of like, hey, like if you don't know, like it's pretty tough to kill rosemary, thyme, mint, chives, basil. Like they're pretty tough to kill. So less is more, and then pick the right soil. If you are going and you're picking a soil for your pots, get one that's kind of like designed for pots. Don't try to pick the cheapest thing. You don't have to get the most expensive either, but don't get the cheapest thing that's like topsoil. Don't put that in pots. it's going in pot, it needs to be designed for that. If it's going in soil, like in ground, that you can get topsoil or raised bed soil. If it's a raised bed, obviously get raised bed soil. Get it. It's not just some like marketing thing, though there is marketing that goes into it, but they are designed for those situations to help plants thrive. Otherwise, people wouldn't buy the shed. Next one is going to be, we're going to wrap this up. This is going to be a short episode, but next one. So buy the right soil. If it's in pots, do that. And then this goes right into the next one of make sure you fertilize them. Probably not exactly what you want to think about. You're just like, if you're like me, you're like, oh, we just put plants in ground, it grows. So it depends. In some places of the country, you can do that and they'll be just fine. And other places, like where I am, you can't do that. So there's a lot of different soil types and everything. If you're just putting shit in the ground, our soil is absolute garbage here, and it's taken me 4 years to kind of turn 5 years now. Is it 4 or 5 years now? To turn the soil around out back to be like, I just did a soil test on it, and it's finally almost to where I want it to be. So it's been a big work in progress, but if you're in pots, you'll need to fertilize. So these plants are anything you're growing, like most of these herbs, most of these vegetables, they are nutrient hogs. They're going to suck up everything in there. And then you're going to be left with barren, or they're just going to stop growing, and you're going to be like, what the fuck? We're getting stuff. And well, they've used up all the fertilizer in that, especially if you're like, well, there's fertilizer in the thing. Yeah, you might not need to fertilize right away. So to help you out, first of all, never buy the all-purpose Miracle Grow. It is not all-purpose. It is only good for like leafy greens. So let's break this down really quick. This is going to be a great nutrition analogy for you. Plants, like humans, have macronutrients. They have macros, except they're different. So it's called NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium for plants. We have carbs, protein, and fats. And you're going to see this anytime you look at fertilizer. All right, so you're new. You want something that's going to be kind of close together. A 5-5-5, a 10-10-10, 15-15-15. So what that means is the percent by weight of those three things of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium is going to be in said fertilizer. So if it's a 5-5-5, 5% nitrogen, 5% phosphorus, 5% potassium. You'll see like the one I just shit on, the Miracle Grow all-purpose. It's not all-purpose. It's going to be like, I think it's like 11 or 18% nitrogen. Then it's like 6% phosphorus, and then like 8%. So you can see a lot of nitrogen and then less on the other stuff. It might even be higher than that. So you want that for very specific situations. If you're just starting out, you want something that you don't have to worry about at all, can just literally go with everything. That's where I'm telling you go with 10-10, 5-5-5, 15-15-15, etc. There's going to be organic or synthetic. Organic is generally slightly better overall for plant and soil health. Synthetic is available right away. So organic is going to break down slowly in the soil, versus synthetic is going to break down pretty quick and is going to be available right away. So you can use both. I use both, but synthetic can also burn your plant. So you do want to make sure you follow the instructions on whatever you get. So organics are generally going to be on the lower end of things. So think like 3-3-3, 5-5-5, or even like, so I like to use Epsoma a lot. So the garden one is like, I think it's like 4-5-5, I think, or I think it's something like that. Like if the numbers are close, like it's like 8-10-5, that's okay. So easy ones to find. I like Epsoma. And then if you're looking for a synthetic, I use one you can find everywhere, Miracle Grow Tomato. It's like 18-18-22, for 22 being the phosphorus. So what the three do, so nitrogen, think of that as like leafy green growth. So great for lettuce and stuff, but if you hit your tomatoes with too much leafy greens, you're going to get a massive leafy plant and no tomatoes. Phosphorus is going to be important for root development and your flowers and everything that comes from the flowers, your fruits, which are going to be tomatoes, zucchinis, cucumbers, the beans, peppers. So if you hit it with too much nitrogen, you're not going to get the thing you actually want. So phosphorus is going to be really, really good for that. And then you have potassium, which is important for the overall metabolism of the plant. So that's why, potassium's up higher. Yeah, it's not going to affect as much as like if you had high nitrogen. Now, the Miracle-Gro Garden Bloom is also pretty good. It's like 15, 30, 15, I think. So if you're just going for like flowers and tomatoes and zucchinis, cucumbers, fruit, flowering type vegetables, fruiting vegetables, that'll be okay for you. I'm probably going to grab that later in the season. But for a general all-purpose, the tomato one actually works really well. And then the Apsoma garden or plant tone, those ones work really well as well to follow the instructions for that. Your plants will deplete whatever is in your pots, so make sure you do fertilize. Otherwise, they're going to be more susceptible to disease and pests. They're not going to be able to fight those things off. So all of a sudden, you're like, my plant's fine. My plant's fine. What the fuck happened to my plant? So yeah, that's going to be very important for you. Let's see. Less is more. So also want to say, going back to this one more time, only take off only as much as you can chew, but also don't plant too many plants into one pot. They're all going to compete for nutrients and stunt growth. So for example, tomato, if you get like what I would consider like fairly standard size, what you would think of like one plant would go in this pot for a vegetable. You're only going to plant one plant in that. Don't plant like, I'm going to put a tomato plant plus a zucchini plant plus beans around the edge. Yeah, that's not going to work. That's a raised bed. That's not a pot. So realize the spacing and everything for it. You can look it up really quick. I need this kind of size. Okay, great. And that's going to just set you up for success. So you have nice, healthy plants, and you're not wasting all this time, money, and energy only to have made a simple mistake, which I've made many times, and overcrowded your plants and stunted the growth completely. So it's not going to like necessarily kill the plant, but you're going to get way less tomatoes. We're talking, sometimes it's not even 50%, sometimes it's like 75% less tomatoes. Like it's significant to where you don't want to do it. Buy more pots or just buy less for the year. Like I can only afford 3 pots with soil. Cool. Pick things out. And so last thing to go over, and this is kind of how I make my selections each year. When you're picking things, you want to pick something that you don't necessarily find at the grocery store. So a lot of the fruits and veggies at the grocery store, they are designed to be easy to transport and not necessarily the best tasting or most nutritious, but they can get from point A to point B without getting bruised, moldy, broke, like rotting, etc. So easy for transport. So there are tons of varieties. Oh, yawn, and I'm totally not editing that out. I don't have time to do that. So there's so many different varieties out there that you can have fun, and you can get things that you'll never see in the grocery store. So get those things, but also only get things you're gonna fucking eat. Don't buy things like people will be like, I'm growing tomatoes. Awesome. You must love tomatoes. Nah, I just saw a reel on this. Nah, we hate them. Like, why the fuck? Well, it's a garden, so you have to. No, you pick the things you want to grow to eat. Like, what are those things? Or if it's flowers, you can just plant pretty flowers, and there's nothing wrong with that. Help the pollinators out. But plant those things. If you know, like, hey, we use a ton of, I use a ton of rosemary, or I love basil in the summer on pasta and all those things. I would love to have my own basil plant so I don't have to keep running to the store. I make mojitos all the time. Okay, I want a mint plant. That would be so much better. I use thyme all the time with all my Italian cooking. Like, buy those things. If you're like, I heard zucchinis are great, but I'm not the hugest fan of them. Like, for your first year, don't grow them. Just don't do it. I don't really like cucumbers, but I heard I can get a lot of them. Then you're going to have an overwhelming number of cucumbers that you have no fucking idea what to do with. You're like, why do I have 15 cucumbers in my house? Why? Yeah, well, you got 15 more on the way, bud. Better figure out what you're going to do with it. If you don't like spicy peppers, don't plant spicy peppers. So it seems kind of straightforward, but when you get into things, you're like, oh, I'll do this. Ooh, I want to try this. Ooh, I want to try this. Yeah, and then it's like, no, dude, just pick a couple things and do that. And there's no right or wrong answer here. I'm just trying. You can pick something super challenging if you want. I'm just trying to help you out with the mistakes I've made. So, oh crap, I totally blanked on the last thing. Last thing I wanted to tell you guys. I remember it now. So, don't buy shit from seed. Okay, so buying from seeds can save you a ton of money. You can get like 100 seeds for like $2 to $5 a lot of times. Like you can get almost 100 plants. Like it's never perfect. So it's like 80 plants for like $5. However, just like having a baby is difficult, so baby plant is also difficult, and it's very easy to kill. So I don't recommend it. Now, some things like chard are pretty easy to do. Lettuce, it's pretty easy to do. Radish, it's pretty easy to do. You can do those pretty easy. But for things like tomatoes, zucchini, cucumbers, go to the nursery that you trust, buy them, and then next year you can experiment with it. But don't do it for like your first time where you're trying to like figure out, like, just buy them from the store. Try to find a healthy looking plant. Like, if the plant looks sad, if you're asking what's healthy, if it looks pretty sad, don't buy it. If it looks nice, healthy, like a wind, it's not going to snap in half if a wind comes through, or if it's not all wilty, like, yeah, get that plant. Don't get the wilty one next to it. Generally speaking. So seeds are very challenging. There's a lot that can go wrong, so I don't recommend you do that for your first time ever. And figure out whether you like things, and then next year you can start from seed because you can get a lot more variety. But I'm going to leave it there. So I wish you a happy Memorial Day. And before we go, guys, just to let you know, I am running a 21-day challenge starting next week. Next week, there's a 21-day challenge, the Peak Fat Loss Challenge. We're going to be giving you guys help with your nutrition, your workouts, and then also with accountability through weekly calls and then a daily accountability chat group. So if you're interested in that, it is completely free. You can just check the show. What was I about to say? The show notes down below, and there's a $500 grand prize to the person who wins. So if you're interested, click down below along with all the other links. And then lastly, as always, please rate the show 5 stars and leave a review to help other people find it and to help me gear content towards you, the listener.